As of shooting this video, I've now owned the Panasonic GH5 for 12 months. I thought I'd give you my full review now that I've had a chance to use it on a daily basis. Let's do it. Welcome to the channel, guys. My name's Shane. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and also click the bell. Now, I've got the GH5 in my hand, so I'm shooting the rest of this video with two G85s. And I'm also going to give you my opinion on what I think about the GH5 over the G85s, or in comparison to the G85s, as well as an FZ2500. Now, this was the first of the Panasonic cameras I got. I then ended up with the GH5, and then I also ended up with two G85s. Now, on my main channel on YouTube, I tend to shoot a lot of multicam stuff, so I'm using 3 or 4 cameras every single video on the most part. So for me, getting matching sensors was also a decision in why I went for the GH5. Even though this was the second camera, I was so impressed with the FZ2500 that I thought, I'm gonna get the GH5 and hopefully it will be even better. I think overall it is a better camera than the FZ2500. To some extent, there's pros and cons of both, but we're gonna get into all of this in the video as well. What I'll also do is I'll leave some time codes in the description or in the comments section of this particular video so you can skip ahead to something if you so choose. So let's get into it. One thing that a lot of people love about the GH5, myself included, I've actually started recording a lot of my videos in 10-bit. Just because you get that little bit of extra color information, it can make grading the footage or even just adjusting it a little bit easier to get some really great results. So it does record 4K 10-bit internally, which is amazing. Now, it also can shoot 4K 60 or 50 depending if you're shooting PAL or NTSC. The great thing about this camera is internally you can also switch it from PAL to NTSC. So if I go to the US and I'm using my PAL mode here in Australia so I don't get any light flicker, if I took that same setting over to the US or somewhere else, I would get light flicker in other countries that use 50 Hertz. So I can then switch it over to NTSC and that's resolved. I won't have any of those problems and I'll get those extra frame rates as well. You can, of course, if you're shooting outdoors, use 4K 60 here in Australia, it won't matter. But anytime there's a light like what I'm using right now, you would notice a flicker and it would be distracting. So I think one of the key features is not only the 10-bit, the 4K 60 and all the variable frame rates that you can use with this camera. It's got so many different codecs, and the fact you can swap the frequency of the camera from PAL to NTSC to also Cinema 4K, which I haven't touched on, but I don't use that particular feature. One of the great things about this camera is the way that it feels in the hand and the button placement. Now, in terms of just the grip, I really think it feels great. I've never used the strap for this or anything like that, and I've traveled overseas with it as well. I've never felt the need to want to use it. I just feel like I've always got a comfortable grip on the camera. And in comparison to the FZ2500, it feels kind of similar, but it just feels a little bit more chunky and maybe a little bit better in the hand. But overall, it's a pretty nice camera. And one of the other cool things about it too is the buttons are where you need them and you never feel like you're accidentally gonna knock them, which I think is also another huge positive. I've never really had this in my hand and gone, oh, whoops, I accidentally clicked something or I accidentally turned something. I love the fact that that's nice and simple. We have the different focus modes on the back, which I really like. But I think the standout thing for me is just the fact that all the function keys are on the top and on the back in really well-positioned areas. You can change your focus modes using the controls on the back. Everything just feels good and it's in a pretty intuitive place. The same can't be said for a lot of other cameras out there. I think Panasonic really get it right with just its form and functionality. Can't go wrong. Another really great positive about the GH5, as well as any Micro Four Thirds system, is the fact you can get lenses not only from Panasonic, but you can also use lenses from other manufacturers like Olympus and Sigma and so forth. So there's plenty of lenses at all different price points, which I think is a really cool thing. Now for me, doing YouTube videos, I get the majority of my work done on this particular channel with these two lenses. I bought two 25mm f1.7 lenses. I really love them, and that's what I'm using right now to shoot this video on the G85. So 2 of those are getting used. I tell you what, one of the most underrated lenses is this kit lens, this 12-60 kit lens from Panasonic. I think it looks great. I use it on my main channel nearly every single video. And as soon as I changed over to this particular system, everybody noticed. Like, it was just, wow, look at the picture quality. It's so much better than it was. Hopefully it's okay now. I'm using the autofocus on both of these cameras, so hopefully it's all right. But yeah, we'll get to the autofocus in a sec. But that said, I think the lens selection is great. And if you want a zoom lens, you can buy one for a bargain. I picked this one up super cheap. And I'll leave some links in the description if you're looking for some of these lenses that I use. And what can I tell you? Even this lens, the laughable 14 to 45 kit lens, might be one of the best vlogging lenses ever. I did a video on that, and I'll post that up in the cards. Great stability in it. What can I tell you? So even some of their junk lenses can work well, especially with a camera of this quality. You can get some really good results. One of the big advantages of the GH5 over, say, the G85s, which I'm shooting with right now, or even the FZ2500, is the fact that we get dual card slots. So we have two SD card slots that we can write to, and I think this is a really great option. You can set it up so it can either record to both at the same time, so if one card fails, you'll have the other card with the same data, or you can have it just record basically through its entirety. So all the way through one and then all the way through the next one, you'll have basically double the amount of time you can record if you're using, say, 64 gig cards or 128 gig cards. So I think that's a really great option. If you're recording something important, you probably want to mirror it just in case something goes wrong. Now, I've never had an SD card fail on me. I've had some of them for years as well, and they work fine. But that said, it's definitely one thing that you should take into account if you're doing something like a paid gig for somebody and you don't have the flexibility of being able to record it again. Odds are you would want to use dual card slots in that particular manner. Look, you probably got like a 99% chance nothing will go wrong, but there's that one time where it will go wrong, and it will happen when you want it to happen least. So keep that in mind. Another really great feature on this camera over some of my others is the fact that we get a full-size HDMI output. Now, anytime I'm in front of the camera and I'm recording at home, much like in this situation, if I'm using the GH5, I have it hooked up to my 28-inch reference monitor. I own a Philips monitor. It's a computer monitor that supports 1080p, and so I can run this actual camera into the monitor and just see everything that's going on. Now, if you're running a HDMI out of this camera, it will actually block the flippy screen if you're in front of it, because basically the screen will be facing the front. The HDMI will be coming out of the front as well. I'll just show you this so you can see what I mean, that it will be coming out this way and blocking the view. So for me, having the biggest monitor possible was definitely a great investment. If you want to find out more about what I'm using, I'll leave a link in the description below. You can check it out as well. I just opted to get the bigger monitor over one of those little portable ones. I'm never going to use a portable one. Anytime I'm taking this out of the house, I'm usually behind the camera. Every time I'm in the house, I'm in front of the camera. So to have a big reference monitor like this, it basically looks like one of these. It's just a lifesaver. One thing that's awesome about this camera as well is the fact you get unlimited recording time, and you also get that on other cameras from Panasonic, like the G85s, the FZ2500, and a few others. But these are just the ones that I own. They all have this feature, and this is why I opted into this system. So just to put it into some sort of context about what's going on, I'm recording with two G85s, and it would be the same if I was recording with two GH5s. I'm going to get one big file, and I can let it record as long as the battery will last. How great is that? This is just one of those features that makes file management so much easier. When I get these two cameras into my editing suite, I'm going to have two files. How cool is that? And it's not going to break it up every 4 gig, and it makes file management so much easier. So being able to get unlimited recording time without having to stop and start the cameras is great. That's one point. The second point is the file management side. Just getting two big files for me is the much preferred way of working. Final Cut handles that no problems. I use a Mac for my editing. I'd much prefer to have two big files, for example, over having two files that were split so many times that I had to join in post. That's just a huge mess. File management, GH5 is awesome. One of the things I really dig about the GH5 is the fact it's got so many great color profiles built into the camera. Now, my three favorite, without question, would be Cine V, which I use all the time. I'm actually shooting with that right now on my G85s. I'll just color correct that slightly, but that's it. I just leave it as it is. I usually just run the balance tool, and I get some really great results with Cine V. Now, Cine D is awesome as well. You can actually grade that. Now this particular camera doesn't come with Vlog either, so I almost don't feel like you need it if you're just shooting YouTube videos. If you're shooting professional stuff and you need to have some of the shots match, Vlog's probably the way to go. But for me, Cine D is great. I got some really great results grading that. If you haven't seen that video, I'll leave it up in the cards as well. And my other favorite by a mile would have to be the natural profile. I think that looks really good as well. That's one that I don't feel like you need to grade. And it doesn't sort of have the green tint about it that some of the other profiles can have on the GH5. Now, I'll get into that in some of the pros and cons towards the end, but the natural profile just looks good straight out of the box. No review of the GH5 from a functionality standpoint would be complete without mentioning how great the onboard image stabilization is, or the IBIS, in-body stabilization. So this is one of those features that when I first got the camera, I thought, it's okay. I wasn't sure I was really that impressed by it. Then I realized it was off. So I clicked it on, I was blown away. It essentially looks like you're on a tripod when you're not on a tripod. It really takes away some of those caffeine shakes if you've just had a Monster or a Red Bull or something like that. It just really locks on, and it locks on really, really well. The only small downside of that is if you are locked on and you pan slightly, it can take just a minute sometimes to kind of want to follow you, but you know, it's a small sacrifice for the fact that it works extremely well. What I've come to do now with this particular camera, and this gets us into the next feature, is the slow-mo is just so good on this. I've got it locked to C1 on the top here. And that's how I get to slow motion. Just literally the variable frame rate option is just one click away for me. And I do all my B-roll now, on the most part, handheld at a higher frame rate, and I just slow it down in post. And with the combination of IBIS, I never use full 180, is it? 180 frames per second. I never get up that fast with it, but for what I do, even running it at, say, 60 frames per second, 4K or 50 if you're in Australia, and then slowing that back down to half speed works amazing. So overall, between the stabilizer and the slow-mo, they get it right. It's really, really great. I also use a very similar setup on my G85s, but I end up using just 1080p at 50 or 60 frames per second. It works fine that way as well. So yeah, I love the stabilizer, and I think the slow motion capabilities of this camera is just fantastic. Now, in terms of the audio preamps that are built into the camera, I have no problems with it at all. I usually use my Rode wireless pack straight into the GH5. If I want to up the game and use a condenser microphone or a shotgun microphone, I'm going over to this. This is the XLR1 adapter from Panasonic as well. And the great thing about this is I actually got it for free when I bought my camera. It was as an offer. And the great thing about this is it just clips straight on the top, and then you get two XLR inputs over here. It works with phantom power. You don't need any batteries for this. It uses the battery from the actual camera. It may shorten the battery life just a little bit, but the trade-off is just fantastic audio. Now, if you want to see how great this particular pack can sound, I did a video comparing a shotgun microphone from Rode and a wireless pack as well. So I'll leave a link up in the cards or in the description. You can check that out also. Another audio hardware feature that's built directly into the camera is the fact we get a headphone output directly on the side. Now, I never use this feature. It's not something that I use with the type of shooting that I do. I'm usually in front of the camera, but if I am behind it, someone else is mic'd up, it makes it easy just to make sure everything's working as it should, nothing's distorting. I mean, you can sort of see distortion through the levels on screen, obviously, but overall, I think it's just a really good addition, and some people will definitely get a whole lot of use out of it. Like I said, I don't use that a whole lot, but it's there if I do need it, which makes it really cool. Let's talk about the focus. The focus on this camera isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is so much better now than it has ever been. The 2.4 firmware upgrade for me works extremely well. Now, I have a little system I like to use, especially in these sort of situations where I'm sitting down. I'm still using autofocus on this camera. I did a full video about my thoughts and maybe best practices of using the autofocus in a situation like this. I'll also post that video up in the cards and you can check that out as well. So for my money, the best autofocus is 1 point. It's that little square. I usually have it sort of on my chest and slightly on my chin. I'm using the same process right now for this particular camera. and the G85 on this side. I've just got the box in the middle, so hopefully that's in focus. And I think this is the most reliable. It doesn't pulse a whole lot either. And like I said, it's gotten better over the years. I've used it for hundreds of videos now on my main channel, which is much bigger than this. At 60 million views, I've never had one person complain about the autofocus performance. So look, if you're shooting a wedding and someone's maybe moving or something like that, then you might experience a different thing to what I experienced. But just as a YouTuber who sits down on the most part, or I'm standing up playing guitar on my other channel, the autofocus performance on this is fine. There's little tweaks you can use, and I love the fact that you can basically move the box anywhere on screen so you can focus on different points. To me, that's just awesome. So if you're behind the camera, even if the camera's on a tripod, you can shift focus just by using your finger on the back of the screen. The functionality of that is fantastic. Now, I know some people say that the face auto detection autofocus is good, and I don't really know about that just yet. I feel like it's still not quite as good as the one area autofocus in my opinion. It might work better for certain people in different situations, but you can see I got some movie posters back here. Face tracking will want to track, you know, the machete from Dawn of the Dead over here. So yeah, if the camera's up a little higher, it can get really confused in those sort of situations. But for me, I've worked out what type of autofocus works the best for me, and I suggest you just play around with it and work out what works best for you as well. Like I said, check the cards of this video up here. You can check out my autofocus test. I think it looked great. I moved towards the camera. I put some things in front of the camera, and it seems to work fine now. So the 2.4 is definitely the best firmware that this camera's had. So if you're thinking about buying one of these and you're a little bit concerned about autofocus performance, depending on your situation, check out my video first, but I think it's going to be fine for the majority of people doing videos like this. One thing that I see come up time and time again on YouTube especially is the whole bokeh argument that Micro Four Thirds can't do bokeh at all or very well. Now, compared to a full frame sensor, maybe it's not quite the same in a situation like this, but how much of it do you really need? That's my question. It should come down to your video content more than it comes down to how blurry your background is. I don't think that's a deal breaker at all. Now, one of the cool things about this particular camera, if I'm using the GH5, say with a 25mm lens, which I do all the time across all of my channels for all of my B-roll stuff, I get some blurry background like that. It's not even hard. So I'm going to overlay some B-roll that I've actually shot with the GH5 right now, and you can tell me if the black background is blurry enough or not. Now, I think it is. I think it looks great. So the way I shoot the B-roll, change it to a higher frame rate and click record and change over to the prime lens, the 25mm 1.7, and I get plenty of blurry background. It also depends on lighting and how much light letting into the camera and all that kind of stuff. And compared to what I was using before, the background blur on these cameras is so much better than my old Canon XA20s. They were fine video cameras as well, but you can get some really great results using Micro Four Thirds, and might just require you to use a better lens or a different lens for a different application. But that's common anyway. So to get the best results, have a couple of different lenses you can reach for, and you should be good to go. Let's talk about the low light performance and whether or not you should be buying a GH5 for that. So if you are going to be shooting mostly in low light, get the GH5S. Don't buy the GH5. If you're shooting under studio light conditions like this and you do a lot of handheld stuff where you want to get a lot of B-roll by hand instead of having to use a tripod, then buy the GH5. There's not a whole lot in it. Now there's one thing to take note of. The GH5S has more of a red tint to the color profile, and the GH5 has more of a green. I can see that green all the time now, and usually in post I remove it. I just pull down the little bar over the green and just pull that out just a hair, and it looks fine. But overall, I think the GH5 isn't the best low light performance camera. So if you're going to be doing a lot of that, then buy the GH5S. It's a bit of a no-brainer. The day I bought this, about a week later, the GH5S was actually in the shop. It's always the way. One of the small criticisms I have of the HDMI output on this particular camera is the fact that it doesn't always display on the external monitor every single time you power on the camera, or Just if the camera's already on and then you plug it in, it doesn't always show the image on the screen. Sometimes you have to unplug it and plug it back in. It's not a deal breaker. I also want some feedback on this as well. I've had 2 of these units. The first one was faulty in a different way, so I returned it within a couple of days and got this one. It's been fine ever since. But they both had that same HDMI output bug where, at least using it with a monitor like what I'm using, this 28-inch Philips monitor, it's got a HDMI input signal as well, obviously. It just doesn't always come on every single time the first time. So it's not a huge deal breaker for what I do. It's simple, turn it off, turn it back on kind of thing. But it's just worth mentioning. Let me know if you experience this problem, and if you do or don't, let me know what kind of monitor you're using in the comments. It will help other people as well. And lastly, my largest criticism of this particular camera is just the functionality flaw that totally sucks. If you've got this hooked up to an external monitor and you click play to go back through the clips you've already recorded, deleting multiple clips is a huge pain. The functionality of the camera goes from being amazing when it's unplugged from the HDMI, you can just use your finger, tap things and you're good to go, as opposed to losing all of that functionality anytime your camera is plugged into the HDMI output. So for me, what I would love is the fact that the screen should still do exactly the same thing when you want to delete multiple clips as when it's plugged into the HDMI output. Now, I think what it is they obviously some of the external monitors have touchscreen functionality, but for those that don't, man, it's just an awful situation. You've got to like click up, and then it's just a horrible thing to delete multiple clips. That's probably the thing I like least. Anytime I need to delete multiple clips and I'm shooting a video like this, for example, or I'm doing a lot of little B-roll and I sort it, I usually take it off the HDMI cable, and I'll do it that way because I don't know why the functionality suffers so much on HDMI cables when you just want to sort and delete multiple clips. It's just a horrible experience. Let me know if you've done this as well. Let me know what you think about it also. Odds are if you're thinking about buying a GH5, you're probably a photographer. Yeah, I'm only kidding. You'll be shooting video. I think 99% of people who buy this buy it for the video functionality, but it can take some pretty solid photos as well in different aspect ratios and formats. As you can see back here, I was in Sweden recently, and I love the fact I can shoot in 16:9, or if I'm taking some photos for Instagram, I can shoot in 1:1, which is square. It does the 4:3 as well, which is also really cool. Now, for me personally, when I shoot all my product videos for YouTube, I'm shooting in 16:9, which is this widescreen aspect ratio. And the reason I do that is because I can frame it how I would see it in the video. And I think that's just great. I can drop it into the project, use the old Ken Burns effect, and get some good results that way. So for what I use it for, it's a solid camera for photos. And I've taken it traveling with me a few times, and I haven't got any real criticisms about the actual photo quality. I think it looks fine, but like I said, I'm not a photographer. I just know what I like the look of. If it looks good to me, then I'm happy with it. So what are my overall opinions and final thoughts on the GH5 for video on the most part? I think it's a great camera. I love the fact, like I mentioned, it does certain things that a lot of camera companies don't do. Unlimited recording time, one big file on the most part, unless you go over 96 gig, but you can just record one big file. The dual SD card slots, the audio adapter is awesome. The variable frame rates and being able to shoot in 10 or 8-bit at different frame rates is amazing. You get lots of different codecs you can choose from. You know, you can extend the capabilities of the camera by using an external recorder as well. I don't know, I just think the stabilizer is great. Everything about this is really good. Now, how does it fare in comparison to the G85s? The G85s are really solid cameras, and that's why I ended up with 2 of them and only 1 of these. The G85s, picture quality wise, is very, very comparable to the GH5, except there's one thing about the G85 color profile I like more. It doesn't look quite as green for whatever reason as the GH5 does. It has this green tint. You can also remove that in body as well. So, you know, if you fiddle around with the white balance, I used to just sort of move the white balance point, or I used to color correct it in body to the left and down a couple of blocks, and that does help with that as well. But the G85s are pretty solid cameras. You just don't get both, or the dual SD card slots, and you don't get, you know, the XLR audio adapter mount. The preamps in the GH5 are better. You get the headphone output as well. But in terms of picture quality, they're very, very comparable. You don't get the crop on this like you do on the G85s. They do crop in a little bit when you're shooting in 4K. The variable frame rates will probably be a deal breaker for some people. If you want that, go for the GH5. Overall, they're both really solid cameras, and this is why I've ended up with a number of different Panasonic cameras. I would take the GH5 over the G85s, but if I'm traveling and I want something like the G85s are a really great choice, and having a lot of those similar capabilities is also fine. If you're not going to be shooting variable frame rates and you don't need such a great stabilizer, look, the G85 has a great stabilizer, but it's not quite as good as this. And if you've got an FZ2500, for example, the stabilizer in this doesn't really work on 4K, so that's a bit of a deal breaker. And this is why I would probably say the GH5 is a better camera. Now, I did a comparison between these two cameras at one point, and I did it probably too soon. I've come to love a lot of the things about the GH5 that I probably didn't know at the time of shooting between both of these, but the FZ2500 is a really great all-in-one choice. If you're stuck on the fence between that, you just want something that you can use, the FZ2500 is a good camera too. Now, just to put this into context too, I'm not a Panasonic fanboy. I use whatever I can get. I've used Sony and I've used Canon as well in the past, and I've also used other Sonys before that also. None of these were free. I went out and purchased everything that you see in this video. These weren't gifted. I'm not an affiliate with Panasonic or anything like that, but there are affiliate links in the description. Anyway, guys, yeah, just to let you know, I'm not affiliated with Panasonic. I just liked the FZ2500 so much that I ended up with the GH5, and then I liked the GH5 so much that I felt like, you know what, the G85 is so close to the GH5 in many ways, just for regular type of shooting, that I'm gonna get a couple of those as well. And when I shoot my multi-cam setup, at least the GH5 and the two G85s look very, very similar to each other. This does look a little bit different in just terms of picture, I guess color profile maybe to some extent, but more along the lines of the picture quality on this doesn't really compare with these other three, at least in terms of video. It looks great, but it's a different kind of look, and if you don't have a comparison, it's hard to probably explain. Thanks for watching, guys. My name's Shane. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and also click that little bell. Now, if you want to find out more about this camera, I'll leave some links below and you can check them out. If you do have any comments or questions, or if I missed something that was important to you, please let me know, and I'll also get back to you in the comments section. I try to get back to everybody who leaves comments on this particular channel. Thanks for jumping on board. My name's Shane. I'll catch you soon. See ya.